Pokemon on Nintendo Switch has had huge variations in quality. Really, this has been the widest spectrum of good and bad Pokemon games on a single console we've ever seen. With such a mixed bag, I think it's important we comb through each game in the series and highlight what they did so right, and what they did so wrong. I'll be talking specifically about the mainline Pokemon games in this list, so if you want to see a list of the best spin-offs as well, let me know in the comments. Without further ado, here's every mainline Pokemon game on Nintendo Switch ranked. I think it'll be no surprise what our bottom two games are in this list. And honestly, they're fairly interchangeable on which one people like and dislike more. But let's talk about the most hated one first. Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. Yeah, we asked for it. A Pokemon game not made by Game Freak. But to be fair, we never asked for one to be made by a company that's literally never made a video game before. This was Ilka Inc.'s first video game ever. And it's not a terrible game necessarily. I mean, it runs, it plays, it functions, but this title quickly became controversial for many reasons. While I, and like 3 other people on the internet, thought the chibi art style was kinda cute, at least after they fixed those creepy hands and proportions from the first trailer, most people saw it as what it rightfully was. A cheap way to make a game within a year so Pokemon can have its sweet, sweet holiday release. It can be argued that this game literally only exists because a certain pandemic saw the delay of Game Freak's actual Sinnoh game. But speculation aside, it's no secret that the cutesy art style made the overworld adventure extremely simple for the developers to craft. It has its charms, sure, but that didn't stop fans from seeing through it. Regardless of how you feel about the graphics though, a universal contention with BDSP is the fact that they were nearly one-to-one remakes of Diamond and Pearl. No Platinum content to be featured whatsoever. No Distortion World. Not even objective improvements from Platinum, like the Galaxy headquarters actually looking like, well, a secret headquarters. To make matters worse, fan-favorite features got botched, like the underground and secret bases, as well as Pokemon contests being reduced to a bad rhythm game. Some things were improved, like difficulty, HM usage, and the addition of follow Pokemon, but the bad seemed to far outweigh the good for most players, and to this day, we're left with a title that hardly anyone wants to pick back up. Fairly interchangeable with BDSP as the worst mainline Pokemon game on Switch was Game Freak's first attempt at a home console title. To no one's surprise, this one is also a remake, which leaves it up to heavy debate among fans as well. Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. From the jump, Let's Go Peevee made some pretty divisive decisions that still have us scratching our heads. They removed many modern Pokemon mechanics like abilities and held items. Hell, they even removed every Pokemon ever released after Gen 1, including evolutions tied to Gen 1 Pokemon that were added after Gen 1. Not even Eevee got its Espeon, Umbreon, or Sylveon evolutions, which just feels mad wrong. Other weird decisions were things like completely changing the way you catch Pokemon, which honestly, as we'll see later, can be done right, but this was just not good. They omitted the Sevi Isles, which were present in Gen 1's first remakes, Fire Red and Leaf Green. Like, those were literally the best parts of those remakes, so it sucked to see them taken out, but oh yeah, there's also the fact that Let's Go is, for some reason, another Gen 1 remake, and one that has less features than previous remakes of the same generation. Just all around a weird decision to make this game, especially the way it was made. Really, Let's Go's entire existence is superfluous, but we know why these games exist, and none of us like the answer. It was to capitalize on the huge success of Pokemon Go. And in that regard, I guess the game was a massive success. And if subsequent numbers for the series are anything to go by, it did its job damn well. Which honestly just makes the whole situation a little more frustrating because I can't be mad that the game brought more fans in, but I'm also mad that this game was the one they made to do it. Oh well, can't win them all, I guess. To be fair to Let's Go Peevee, it's worth noting things it did right. The follow Pokemon mechanic was one of the best we've seen in the series. It was smooth, intuitive, and visually pleasing. You could even ride on certain Pokemon too. Lack of animations aside, the graphics style for Let's Go was also a strong point. The color palette was vibrant, the water looked stylized, and the environments were inviting. These aspects made it easier to forgive the simplistic Pokemon and character models, as well as the severe lack of animations present throughout the game. There were even fun features added, the biggest of which was wild Pokemon running around the routes. This was a huge game changer for the series and feels so much more at home than random encounters. There's also a feature where you can dress up, feed, and pet your partner Pokemon. And while this is just a watered down version of Pokemon Ami or Refresh, as you can only do this with your partner Pokemon Pikachu or Eevee, it was the first time we had this mechanic in a Gen 1 game. So there's that. Another cool added feature was the ability to play co-op, which was extremely OP, but good fun for someone who needs the help or just wanted a Pokemon experience with friends. All in all, Let's Go is a game that can still satisfy a young newcomer to the series, even if we're about to see far better examples of games that can do the same thing and more. Yeah, it's time to talk about the most controversial Pokemon game ever released. This game created so many arguments online that Pokemon went from being a franchise we looked to for escapism to a series we saw as problematic. Now, Sword and Shield were actually really good Pokemon games. Personally, they're still some of my favorite in the series, and we're going to talk about the positives and why I love it, but you cannot talk about Sword and Shield without first discussing its flaws, and boy, were there a lot of flaws. Poor frame rate, extreme pop-in, incorrect size scaling that shrinks every large Pokemon to be shorter than your 10-year-old trainer, awkward moments thanks to no voice acting. Pokemon not creating splashes in water, Nintendo 64 graphics, and no, it wasn't just this one tree, it was the entire wild area. Barely controllable camera, follow Pokemon that can't keep up with you so they pop in and out of existence, follow Pokemon being locked behind a paywall for just these DLC areas, low quality animations, sometimes no animations at all, Pokemon being twirled around or bounced up and down on rigs without moving their bodies, Pokemon not having turning animations, cutscenes being too lazy to animate anything so they just fade to black. Oh yeah, and who could forget, to top all this off, the Pokédex was cut to only offer a limited selection of Pokemon, even to transfer into the game, with only 400 or so Pokemon coded in, and a lot of players had their favorites stuck in Pokemon Home, with no way of sending them back to previous games or a new game because they just don't exist in Sword and Shield. Now, we could sit here and discuss everything wrong all day long, and believe it or not, yes, there's even more wrong with the games than I listed, but you've probably heard all of it before, and honestly, I'd rather not linger on the negatives. We've done this enough in this video, so let's flip to a more positive side. If I could sum Sword and Shield's flaws up in one phrase, it would be immersion breaking. There you go, that's all you need to know. It's a great game marred by a lack of immersion and controversy surrounding a dex cut. So, what made Sword and Shield still a great game? Well, a lot of that boils down to other factors unrelated to these. While the graphics were bad, Sword and Shield's art style was still very strong. If you were to look at an unmoving image of the game, especially outside of the wild area, odds are it looks pretty. The region itself is varied and gorgeous, with outstanding music to accompany it. This was honestly one of my favorite soundtracks in any Pokemon game, and its leitmotif is still the best in the series, in my opinion. The gym challenge being portrayed as a sporting event was really fun and exciting. The game rarely had a dull moment, even if the other story elements were pretty weak. Well-written characters carried the experience with lovable growth arcs. All of this mixed together for a well-paced experience that kept me surprisingly engaged, even if the flaws along the way were constantly rearing their heads. Sword and Shield even enjoyed one of the healthiest competitive scenes ever to grace Pokemon, and listen, hear me out, Pokemon Camp is still some of the most fun I've had with a Pokemon game ever. Sword and Shield embodied the culmination of Game Freak's established conventions, for better and for worse. From a gameplay standpoint, they're perhaps the most refined versions of the conventional Pokemon experience, but What fans really wanted was evolution. Much like the Pokemon themselves, players were ready for innovation, and indeed, that was something Game Freak was preparing to finally deliver in secrecy. Now, before I talk about these last two games, I want to clarify where we stand, both on my own opinion and on the general consensus from fans and casuals alike. These last two games we're about to talk about are universally agreed upon to be the best Pokemon games on Switch. BDSP and Let's Go Pikachu Eevee are generally considered to be the worst, setting them in the bad category. Sword and Shield is generally the most mixed bag out of the entire series, with so many positives, but so many negatives existing in the same product, earning it the only slot in the mixed category. But these last two, are where we enter the actual good game territory. Many people consider these to not only be some of the best games in the series, but some of their favorite games of all time. With that said, let's talk about the second best Pokemon game on Nintendo Switch. Imagine a fully open world full of your favorite fictional creatures. Most people only dreamed of the day a Pokemon game like this would be made. You want to be the very best and catch them all, but you also want to experience other trials and tribulations associated with being a Pokemon trainer. The world is living, breathing, and so are its people. We have personal struggles of our own, insecurities, loneliness, even death. How would it feel to play a story in the Pokemon world that ties our little buddies to our adventure in finding ourselves and overcoming hardship? In the most modern sense, there's only one Pokemon game that thrusts us in these shoes. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is the first and only Pokemon game to tie traditional Pokemon conventions to innovation. These games provided us a world and story to living out the closest thing we'd ever get to playing through the Pokemon anime. Seamless open environments, taking your Pokemon out for a stroll or picnic, taking on the gym challenge, and finding yourself getting caught up in adventures bigger than yourself. Scarlet and Violet has it all, especially when you include the 3-stage DLC, the Teal Mask, the Indigo Disc, and Mochi Mayhem. Scarlet and Violet have even dethroned Sword and Shield for the best competitive scene in the series, thanks to superb balancing, creative team building, and strategic innovation with the Terra mechanic. Really, this game has something for almost anyone. It's worth noting a few negatives hosted here though. You can't talk about Scarlet and Violet without talking about the state the game was in upon release. And honestly, the state it stayed in for a long time, only to be fixed no sooner than almost a year after release. The game suffered from a massive memory leak issue, which would cause insane amounts of jitter and frame rate drops for the player. Not only that, but the memory leak also caused a plethora of glitches to take place, oftentimes even leading to the game crashing. This title really did need at least one more year of development time before release, but we know what Pokemon's release schedule is like, so it was virtually unplayable for most people in the majority of 2023 anyways. Memory leak aside, there's really very few flaws to be found within the game. The only real issues the game itself had was the removal of a few quality of life features established by another Pokemon game we've yet to talk about, as well as the return of touching a Pokemon in the overworld sparking a battle. Something that's antithetical to open world design. But at least it's tolerable now that the memory leak no longer turns accidental encounters into a 30-second plus ordeal. No, what Scarlet and Violet will go down in history to being remembered for was its epic story, characters, and world building. These games host arguably the best story in the series, as well as many of the best characters in the series. It had a lovably designed open world to explore, awesome features and mechanics that let you feel close to your Pokemon, and lore drops for days. No, really, so many long-standing theories and questions were answered here, it's insane. But one Pokemon game still does stand above even this for the top spot on the list. A Pokemon game that said, to hell with tradition, and focused entirely on innovation with no remorse. The true step forward for the series that paves the way for future installments to come. Now I want you to imagine Pokemon existing in real life, not in a fantasy setting, but right here in our very own tangible world. What would coexisting with them be like? The small ones, the cute ones, the cool ones, the big ones, the scary ones, the evil ones. Perhaps it's not all cotton candy and rainbows, is it? Actually, a world of Pokemon sounds a lot like a very dangerous place, and believe it or not, but Game Freak made a game that tackles that very concept. Enter Pokemon Legends Arceus. This was it. After Sword and Shield left us with a taste of uncertainty in our mouths, it's as if Game Freak answered our deepest concerns with this one game. Gone are the trivialities of Pokemon tradition. Pokemon Legends Arceus knew what it wanted to be, and it delivered unapologetically. Every fiber of this game's existence oozes with metamorphosis. For the first time ever in Mainline, you're not participating in a battle league. There's no Elite Four. Heck, there are hardly even any Pokemon trainers, and why is that? Because they don't exist yet. Yeah, this time we're a warrior chosen by Arceus itself to go to the past and revolutionize an entire civilization to coexist with Pokemon. Our goal? To catch them all and introduce them to the townsfolk. Sounds simple, except there's one big problem. This time period is the target of a malevolent force seeking to turn Pokemon against the people. That's right, not only is the story completely turned on its head for this title, but the gameplay is as well. Pokemon Legends Arceus was an action RPG, meaning, well, the Pokemon freaking attack you. Yeah, you not only need to strategize properly in turn-based combat, but you also need to hone your skills for dodging, throwing, and sneaking to take out and catch Pokemon this time around. There are even boss battles that test your finesse and get harder and harder the further you progress. You need to work with your Pokemon to gather resources, clear obstacles, and protect yourself from wild Pokemon. To top all that off, this was the first Pokemon game ever to let you take all your Pokemon out, anywhere, on the fly. And it is still the only one to let you do this seamlessly without reaching into a menu. If Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is the Pokemon anime experience, Pokemon Legends Arceus is the Pokemon manga experience. The stakes are deadlier, the dialogue is heavier, the atmosphere is darker. This isn't the Pokemon we've known, but it's the one we've dreamed of. A more mature take on the series that fits the age of the audience that grew up with it. Legends even goes out of its way to expand on lore that was previously established in Pokédex entries. Even some of the creepiest ones, like how Drifloon wisps little kids away, and elaborates on how even cute little Pokemon can be really dangerous. There's also even more world building in the form of how we see Sinnoh become the region it is in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. I don't want to spoil anything, so I'll let you play it and see for yourself. But I will say there were quite a few unexpected plot twists, so you do have a lot to look forward to. Now, so far you're probably wondering, okay, this sounds great, but Scarlet and Violet sounded just as good. They're just different. And yes, you're right. Honestly, these two games are interchangeable for the #1 spot based on personal preference. But there are several objective factors I want to look at that puts Pokemon Legends above Scarlet and Violet. For one, PLA is the most polished mainline Pokemon game on Switch. There are nearly no performance issues to be found, nor were there ever. It's the snappiest, most flawless Pokemon experience in years. The second factor is the timing of release. Pokemon Legends came at a time when Game Freak really needed to prove to us that they could make a good game, or the series would forever suffer criticism from here on out. Legends answered those worries and more with its announcement and release, whereas Scarlet and Violet is argued to have released too soon, leading to massive performance issues, glitches, and crashes. The third factor is Pokemon Legends Arceus is a complete game with no paid DLC, and it doesn't have two versions. You just have the game, and everything you need is included in itself, offering the best price value of any Pokemon game on this list. Again, I want to reiterate, this is a very close race between the two, and for most people, which one is #1, it's fairly interchangeable. And that's nothing but a good thing for both games, for all of us. The fact that we actually finally got amazing Pokemon games on Switch that we can rave about is all we could ever want. And I'm so happy we can fanboy over our opinions here together. So let me know your list down in the comments section. I'm really curious to see if anyone puts BDSP or Let's Go at the top instead of at the bottom, or whatever else you guys do with this list. So let's talk about it, and feel free to check out my other Pokemon videos as well. They're on the screen right now. I've been johtojonny. Enjoy, everyone.